The most dangerous man in Montreal did not look up when Sable Okafor walked into the room. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the guns. Not the bodyguards stationed at every exit like furniture that could kill you. Not even the smell of cigar smoke thick enough to taste. It was the fact that Théodore Vran was the only person in the Auberge Sainte-Claire who was not watching the door. Every other man in that private dining room had clocked her the moment she pushed through the heavy mahogany panel. She had felt their eyes drag over her, the slow, assessing kind that started at her face, dropped to her chest, took inventory of her hips, and filed the information somewhere between irrelevant and amusing. She was used to it. 29 years of living in a body that took up more space than the world had decided to allocate for her had made Sable very good at becoming invisible in plain sight. She tucked her chin, adjusted the strap of her laptop bag, and reminded herself that she was here for one reason: the spreadsheets. She was the forensic accountant the Vrain organization had retained through 3 layers of legal intermediaries, specifically because she was the kind of person no one remembered. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't a prize. She was a number cruncher in a blazer that strained slightly at the shoulders, carrying a bag heavy enough to give her scoliosis by 40, and she had been explicitly told by her contact, a nervous man named Serge, to arrive, deliver the quarterly reconciliation documents, answer any questions, and leave without making eye contact with anyone above the rank of mid-level associate. She had been planning to do exactly that. Théodore Vrain finally looked up. The thing about his eyes was that they did not announce themselves. There was no dramatic moment where the room went quiet, or the light shifted. He simply lifted his gaze from the document in front of him, and suddenly Sable had the peculiar sensation of being scanned by something that did not particularly care what it found, but would remember it regardless. "You're late," he said. His voice was low, not raised, not sharpened with irritation. It was the voice of a man who had never needed to shout to make a point. Sable checked her watch. "I'm 4 minutes early." The silence that followed was the kind that made the 2 men nearest her go very still. Théodore Vrain set down his pen. He was not what she had expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. Something more theatrical, perhaps. The photos she had come across during her due diligence were all formal or grainy or taken from a distance. In person, he was simply a man in a dark suit at the head of a long table, somewhere north of 40, with a kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from control. Total, considered, absolute control over every movement his body made. The grey at his temples was the only thing about him that suggested he had existed long enough to accumulate enemies. "Serge said 7 o'clock, Vrain said. "Serge is wrong," Sable said, and pulled out the chair at the foot of the table without being invited to sit. "I have the confirmation text if you'd like to see it." She was aware, distantly, that her heart was attempting to exit her chest through her sternum. She was also aware that showing that would be the worst possible thing she could do in this room. So she set her bag on the table with a decisive thud, unzipped it with the practiced calm of a woman who had delivered tax audit findings to very unpleasant people for 7 years, and removed a bound document that was exactly 43 pages long. "The reconciliation," she said, sliding it toward him. "Flagged entries on pages 12, 19, and 31. The discrepancy on page 19 is not an error. It's a rounding artifact from the currency conversion your Brussels account used in October. I've documented the methodology in the appendix. The discrepancy on page 31 is an error, but it's not yours. Someone in your Montreal receivables chain has been skimming, not much, carefully for approximately 18 months. Not one person in that room moved." Théodore Vrain looked at the document. Then he looked at her. "I am sitting down," she said. Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't warmth, it was closer to the way a chess player looks at a board when a piece does something unexpected. Recalculation, reassessment. "Who told you about Brussels?" he asked. "The numbers did," Sable said. "That's generally how it works." She watched one of the bodyguards near the window shift his weight. She watched Vrain notice that she had noticed. She watched him decide, in real time, what he thought of a forensic accountant who sat at his table and told him one of his people was stealing from him with the same energy most people used to order a sandwich. "You're not what I was told to expect," he said. "Serge didn't describe me. Serge described a consultant." "I am a consultant," Sable said. "What were you expecting?" He didn't answer. He picked up the document and turned to page 31. She had prepared for this meeting the way she prepared for all of them, thoroughly, obsessively, and without any expectation that it would go well. She had built her career in the specific, unglamorous corner of financial forensics that dealt with money that wasn't supposed to exist, for clients whose businesses weren't supposed to operate, in ways that weren't supposed to be documented. She was very good at it. She was good at it partly because she had a genuine gift for pattern recognition, and partly because she had learned, a long time ago, that the safest way to move through the world was to be so relentlessly competent that people forgot to be unkind. Mostly it worked. Page 12, Rain said, without looking up. The Cayman transfer. Your legal team structured it correctly, but the timestamp sequence creates an apparent loop. It will flag in any automated audit system. I've outlined 3 ways to restructure the documentation trail so it reads cleanly. Option C is the most conservative. Option A is the most efficient but carries a 6% residual exposure. My recommendation is B. He turned to page 12. Sable waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned that in rooms like this, the person who filled silence first lost something, though she had never been entirely sure what. The man to Vrain's left. She had identified him as a senior associate, based on his positioning, and the fact that everyone else in the room deferred to his sightline rather than his words, leaned down and murmured something close to Vrain's ear. Vrain did not respond. He kept reading. The associate tried again. Mr. Vrain, I heard you, Raimi, Vrain said, still reading. I'm choosing not to respond. Raimi straightened. He looked at Sable with the particular expression of a man who had decided she was the source of his current discomfort and intended to remember that. She looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had been looked at like that by significantly scarier people and had continued to exist regardless. The person on page 31, Vrain said, finally setting the document down. You're certain 94%, Sable said. The remaining 6% accounts for the possibility that I'm wrong, which I typically document in the interest of intellectual honesty. I can be more certain if you give me access to the original receipt records from the last fiscal year. Why? Because whoever it is, they're good, not good enough. They made 3 structural mistakes that left a pattern, but good. If I can see the source documents, I can tell you exactly when they started, exactly how much they've taken, and exactly what they plan to do next. Vrain studied her across the length of the table. It was not the look she'd received when she walked in. The inventory look, the assessment and epistle. This was something else. This was the look of a man recalibrating. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. I've caught 12 people stealing from organizations that believed they had no vulnerabilities, she said. 11 of them thought the same thing your associate on page 31 thinks, that small and consistent is invisible. It isn't. Nothing that happens more than twice is invisible to the right kind of attention. The room was very quiet. Theodore Vrain said, Raimi, leave us. The sound of a chair being pushed back, footsteps, the door closing. Sable kept her face still. Internally, she was doing the mental calculation that every sensible person does when they are suddenly alone in a room with the most powerful criminal in Quebec. I have not been invited to leave. He has sent everyone else away. These are not the same thing. You're not afraid, Vrain said. I didn't say that, she said. You didn't have to. He leaned back in his chair, unhurried, like a man with all the time in the world, and the means to take it from anyone who disagreed. You walked into this room, sat down without permission, told me one of my people is robbing me, and corrected me about the time. That's not the behavior of someone who's afraid. That's the behavior of someone who is afraid and has decided to be professional about it anyway, Sable said. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. What's your name? He asked. Which was interesting, because he had her contract, he had her credentials. He had been sent her full name by 3 layers of legal intermediaries. He was asking because he wanted to hear her say it. Sable Okafor Sable, he repeated, and something about the way he said it made her want to ask him to say it again and also to immediately not want that. You'll have the source records by tomorrow morning. I'll need a secure transfer protocol. I won't receive unencrypted files, fine, and access to the original vendor contracts from 2022 onwards, fine. And I'll need someone to answer questions who isn't Rémi, because Rémi doesn't like me and I find that distracting. There was a pause. Is that it? He asked. For now, Sable said. And Theodore Vrain, the man who controlled 3 shipping ports, 2 construction firms, and the better part of the city's political infrastructure, did something that no one in that room had seen him do in recent memory. He almost smiled. She had not planned to come back. She had planned to file her supplementary report remotely, send her invoice through the usual channels, and classify this engagement as interesting but one time and move on to her next client, who was a perfectly legitimate import business in Laval, whose only crime was catastrophically bad bookkeeping. But the source records arrived at 6:15 the next morning, properly encrypted, from an address she didn't recognize. And when she opened them, the picture they painted was so precise and so deliberately structured that she sat at her kitchen table in her pajamas with a coffee going cold beside her and spent 4 hours barely blinking. Whoever was stealing from Theodore Vrain was not simply skimming. They were building a ledger, a hidden one, clean and compartmentalized, that would look, to anyone but Sable, like entirely routine transaction noise. It was elegant, it was patient, and it had a purpose that went beyond money. She called the contact number she had been given at 9 in the morning, not Surge, the direct one which she had been told to use only in the event of a genuine emergency. The call was answered on the second ring. Okafor, said Theodore Vrain's voice, and the fact that he knew exactly who was calling before she said a word was not, in retrospect, surprising. This isn't a theft, she said without preamble. It's a map. Whoever's doing this isn't taking your money. They're documenting where it came from. This is evidence collection. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she wondered if she had made a mistake. Come in, he said. Now, I have another client at 10. I'll have someone reschedule them. You don't have their number. I have everyone's number, Sable. She went in. The office was different from the dining room, smaller, more private, filled with the specific quiet of a space where serious things were decided. She had barely sat down before the door opened again, and Remy walked in, holding a tablet and radiating the concentrated displeasure of a man who had been specifically told to cooperate with someone he didn't want to cooperate with. He set the tablet in front of her without a word. She looked at it, then she looked at Vrain. This is an internal org chart, she said. Yes, you're showing me an internal org chart. I'm showing you what it will take for you to find the source. Sable set the tablet down. I want to be very clear about something. I find money. I read records. I do not work with information that could make me a liability to your organization. She said it carefully, precisely, the way she always said the important things. Not fast, not heated. Measured. If I know operational details, I become a risk. I'm not willing to become a risk. You already know more than is safe, Vrain said. I know accounting irregularities. That's the lowest risk thing anyone in this building knows. Not anymore. He was looking at her steadily. What you found this morning isn't accounting. It's an active intelligence operation. Someone inside my organization is building a case. If they finish it, he paused. A lot of people will be significantly inconvenienced. He said inconvenienced the way other people said destroyed. Sable looked at the tablet. Then she looked at the ceiling. Then she looked back at Theodore Vrain. I'm going to need a significantly higher fee, she said. Name it. She named it. He didn't blink. And I work from a neutral location. Not here, agreed. And if at any point I determine that the risk to my personal safety has exceeded my professional tolerance, you leave, he said. No consequences. Which was the right answer, and the fact that he gave it immediately and without qualification told her something about him that she filed away carefully. Next to does not shout and sent his associate out of the room before threatening me. Which means he wasn't going to threaten me. She was very good at reading rooms. Rooms full of dangerous men in particular, because that was where the margins for misreading were the thinnest. Fine, she said. I'll find your mole. It took her 11 days, not because it was hard. By day 4, she had it narrowed to 3 people. By day 7, she had it narrowed to 1. The remaining 4 days were documentation. The ironclad, meticulous, absolutely bulletproof kind that left no room for argument, because she had learned the hard way that in rooms like these, I believe was worthless, and I can prove was the only currency that mattered. She had barely seen Vrain during those 11 days. He existed at the periphery of her awareness as a series of texts. Terse, precise, never unnecessary, and one phone call on day 6 when she had hit a documentation wall and needed access to a secondary set of records that no one else seemed to know existed. He had known. He had provided them within the hour without asking how she knew to ask for them. On day 12, she brought him the file. She set it on the desk between them. He opened it. He read it. She watched his face do nothing, which she had come to understand was his version of a significant reaction. Remy, he said at last. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. He's been with me for 9 years. I know, Sable said. He started 17 months ago. The consistency of the intervals suggests he was approached by someone external and given a specific timeline. This wasn't opportunism, he was recruited. Vrain closed the file. "You're certain?" 100%, she said. "I upgraded from 94. He looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he had across the dining room table on the first night, except that now there were 11 days of something between them that she didn't entirely have a name for. Proximity, maybe, the particular intimacy of someone trusting you with something that matters. "Thank you," he said. It was a simple phrase, 2 words, quiet, direct, but from Theodore Vrain she had the sense it was not a thing he said lightly. "I'll send my final invoice," she said. "I know." He paused. "I'd like to retain you. Ongoing." Sable blinked. It was the first time he had seen her look genuinely surprised, and something in his expression shifted in response. Not much. A degree of warmth barely measurable, like the temperature difference between one room and another, that you only notice once you've crossed the threshold. "That's not what I do," she said. "I do forensic work. One-time engagements. I'm aware of what you do. I'm asking you to do it differently." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, it was with the careful precision of a man who had chosen his words before he opened his mouth. "Because in 11 days you have found something 9 years of internal oversight missed. Because you work without needing to be managed. Because you told me Remy doesn't like you and you were right, and the reason he doesn't like you is the reason I want to keep you." She looked at him, and he added very quietly, "Because you are the first person who has sat across a table from me in a very long time and argued about the time." Sable sat with that for a moment. Outside she could hear the distant sound of the city, Montreal in early November, wet leaves and cold wind, and the particular hum of a place that had been old long enough to know it. "I have conditions," she said. "You always do. I work exclusively. I close my other files. Done, I set my own hours. Done, I retain the right to refuse any task that crosses specific lines. I'll provide the list in writing. I'd expect nothing less." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't negotiate," she said. "I negotiate constantly," he said. "I'm not negotiating with you." The distinction, she thought, was significant. "Fine," she said. "But I want it in a contract. I'll have the lawyers draft it tonight." "Your lawyers or mine?" "Yours," he said, and the fact that he said it without hesitation, that he gave her that without being asked for it, was the thing that she turned over later in her apartment, alone, with the city lights reflected in the dark window and a glass of wine she had poured and forgotten about. She had been very careful for a very long time to be the kind of person no one remembered, to take up the right amount of space, which, she had been taught in ways both direct and indirect, was less than she naturally occupied. She had gotten very good at making herself smaller, at entering rooms without taking them, at delivering findings that unsettled powerful men, and then packing up her bag and leaving before they could decide what to do with the discomfort. She was not sure, precisely, when Theodore Vrain had begun looking at her the way he did, like she was a fixed point, like she was the thing in the room he had decided to orient by. She was not sure, but she remembered the exact moment she had noticed. It was 3 weeks after she started the retainer, a meeting with 4 men she didn't know, at a location she had been driven to, by a route that made it unmappable, ostensibly to discuss some anomalies she had flagged in a real estate holding structure. The meeting had been going fine. She was presenting, they were listening, everything professionally courteous, until one of the men, heavy-set, grey-suited, with the specific self-satisfaction of someone who had never been wrong in a room where he had the most money, looked at her mid-sentence and said, "Vrain must be getting sentimental. Since when does he use decorative staff?" The room went absolutely still. Sable stopped talking. Not because she was shaken, though a hot, familiar shame had flared in her chest, the same one that lived there permanently and only varied in intensity. She stopped because she had learned, a long time ago, that responding in the moment was almost always less effective than the particular silence that made a man realize he had miscalculated. She looked at him. She kept her expression neutral. She let the silence do its work. Then Theodore Vrain, who was seated to her left and had not moved, said very quietly, "Say that again." It was not a question. It was the verbal equivalent of a door being closed. The man in the grey suit laughed, slightly less certainly. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant," Vrain said. "Mrs. Okafor is the reason you are still operating through legal channels, rather than facing a forensic audit by the CRA. She found a structural flaw in your Vancouver holdings 6 days ago that would have cost you 3 times what you paid her. I suggest you reconsider both your vocabulary and your gratitude. The man in the grey suit turned the colour of old chalk. Vrain looked back at Sable, a beat. A question in his eyes that wasn't asking if she was all right. He could see that she was, but something else. Something that acknowledged, without performance, that he had seen what happened in her face in the half-second before the stillness. And he was telling her, with the precision of a man who chose every word, that it mattered to him. "Continue," he said. She continued. She did not say anything about it until the meeting was over and they were in the car, separated from the driver by a partition, the city scrolling past in the dark. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "I was handling it. I know that too." She looked at him. Then why? He looked back at her, and for once, for the first time since she had walked into the Auberge Sainte Claire with a 43-page document and an internal terror she had refused to show, he looked like a man who was not entirely in control of his own expression. "Because I wanted to," he said. It was such a simple answer. Such a plainly human thing, from a man who was supposed to be something other than human in the categories that mattered in his world. Sable looked out the window at Montreal going past, the bridges, the river, the lights multiplying in the water. "The man on page 31, she said. "What happened to him? He's been dealt with. Are you going to tell me how?" "No," she nodded. That was the line, and they both knew it. She found the numbers. She didn't follow them to their conclusions. "Okay," she said. They were quiet for a while. The car moved through the city. Somewhere south, the river was doing what rivers do, moving without being asked, carrying whatever it was given, cold and indifferent and constant. "I used to be afraid of this," she said. She wasn't sure why she was saying it. Something about the dark, maybe. Something about being in a moving car with a man who had seen her face in the half-second before she put it away. Not specifically this, just rooms full of people like you. I used to walk in already smaller than I needed to be, so that there was less of me for anyone to find fault with. "Used to," he said. "Still do sometimes," she said honestly. "Old habits." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You walked into my dining room and told me one of my people was stealing from me, before I had offered you a glass of water. I was terrified," she said. "I know," he said. "And you did it anyway." He paused. "That's not a small thing." Sable looked at him in the dark of the car. He was not looking at her the way the man in the grey suit had looked at her. He was not doing the inventory. He was looking at her the way you look at something you're grateful you found before you lost the chance to find it. She was 31 years old, and she had spent most of those years making herself as unobtrusive as possible. And here was Théodore Vrain, the man who ran 3 ports and owned the better part of the city's infrastructure, and had sent his most senior associate out of the room because he'd decided Sable. Finding him disruptive was a problem worth solving. Looking at her like she was the fixed point in a room that could otherwise spin loose. "You're very strange," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "You know that I'm not." She stopped. Old instinct. The one that always wanted to preemptively list the reasons something was unlikely. She closed it. He waited. "Nothing," she said. "You were going to say you're not what people like me usually." "Don't finish that sentence," she said. "Why not?" "Because I already know how it ends and I've decided I'm bored of that particular story." He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the careful deliberateness of a man placing a final piece, "Good." The car turned off the bridge and into the grid of the old city, and Sable Okafor sat with the warmth of that single word. "Good." The way you sit with something you weren't expecting to be given and aren't yet sure how to hold. She'd figure it out. She was very good at finding the logic in things that didn't immediately make sense. She suspected this one might take a little longer than 11 days.